jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show.
Hey, welcome. Got Jerry Cortes from the Dark Discussions and Legion Network. How are you, sir?
Greetings and salutations, my friend. Yes, I'm doing very good. How you doing, brother?
I am not bad at all. We've been having a hell of a time each time, just recording.
Awesome.
So, what was your introduction to the MST3k Cinematic Titanic RiffTrax collective?
Let's see. I went to college. My wife and I actually both went to college in Pittsburgh in the mid 90s. So I definitely I was a little late to the party. I pretty much missed out as far as first airings. I probably missed out on all of the Joel years, and it was right around when the movie was released that a friend of mine, a mutual friend of my wife and I, introduced us to the movie MST3K, the movie.
Perfect.
And we basically left his house with stomach aches from just laughing so hard. Our faces were a mess from just laughing tears. It was just amazing, and it's literally one of my favorite moments in my life, honestly, because it was one of our best friends from college. My girlfriend at the time, who would later become my wife, and yeah, just I literally don't remember laughing so hard at any point in my life. And then from there, yeah, we luckily the show was still on. I'd say it was 95 or 96 at this point, so we still had a good 3 or 4 seasons of the original show, and we watched those final seasons first run, recorded every episode on VHS. I had a box of MSCs.
Nice.
Oh yeah. Tried to make a point of eventually getting all 190 whatever original episodes, but once once video sharing and all that kind of took over in the late 90s on the internet, yeah, we just relied on YouTube. And recently well, maybe not recently, but in the last year or two, we finished another run of the series, all 200 and whatever episodes, including the new season. So yeah.
Damn.
Good times. And then as far as everything else, I mean, yeah, obviously RiffTrax branched off from the MSC, and pretty much any time somebody would have a new riffing venture, yeah, the wife and I would be on top of it. Cinematic Titanic, what do you call it? The film crew, all of it. Yeah, just as soon as that stuff was available, we devoured it and enjoyed all of it.
Were you already a fan of other people who predated it, like the Joe Bob or Elvira or Svengoolie?
Absolutely, yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't get Svengoolie growing up in Connecticut. We got Elvira, obviously, nationally. We got Joe Bob, obviously, on Monster Vision. But yeah, big fan, just because at the time, too, obviously, before the internet and everything and easy access to movies, you're relying on television for your horror fix. So yeah, Friday or Saturday nights, whatever horror host was available, I was there.
And just plus they were kind of a movie trivia, machine all in their own rights. They'd tell you a little about this before they, got to.
Absolutely. Joe Bob has probably taught me more about 80s cinema than the internet has at this point.
Right. I grew up in the time of GeoCities and everything, but yeah, it's like I was kind of the same way. I had 2 different uncles, and parents who had videotaped it, but it was also kind of funny how, like you say, is like it took a while for anyone to kind of keep up with it, but you just couldn't help but kind of notice some kind of similar influence whenever you saw, cartoon shows would sneak in a mock silhouette shot, or there'd be some other kind of zany humor. It's like, yeah, this is nutty. And I mean, you even saw it when you saw other similar shows like Red Dwarf and so forth. This is like, there's some nutty type stuff out there. Is like, and I did see parts of Svengoolie, but the thing was, I never saw like the complete opening credits, and I didn't know what it was really. I just saw parts of it growing up, and then it's like I've just kind of been more religious watching him in general, because he's always updating his old episodes with like new segments before he shows older segments. So, I mean, yeah, it really is kind of wild though too, how you can actually understand them justifying the price on these various sets now, because it's like, yeah, it's like this was a hell of a time getting through it all. You're not going to watch it all in one scoop, and plus, sometimes they go to the effort sometimes of saying, hey, if you want to watch the movie uncut, here's a special feature.
That's always appreciated, definitely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
but yeah,
God.
man, I have spent so much money. I mean, as I turn around and look at my Mystery Science Theater and RiffTrax, and I own pretty much every RiffTrax physical media that's out there, be it the shorts, the movies. I have almost every season of MST. There are some that escaped me. Obviously, the famous season 10 with Godzilla versus Megalon is still one that has escaped my grasp. But for the most part, if it's movie riffing with the MST guys and it's on physical media, I have it.
Perfect.
And some of it, wow. I'm not ultra proud to say that I have paid upwards of over $100 for some of those box sets just because of how hard they were to get. But you know what? For me, it's worth every penny.
Well, and totally. And I mean, after a while, when we're doing podcasting, it's the same thing where it's just like, yeah, okay, I'm going to spend this X amount on these kind of movies that are nowhere on any kind of movie site, on any kind of, rental service. Is like, yep, I'm just going to take the plunge and go on eBay and
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I actually recently picked up a multi-region Blu-ray player just so that I can kind of limit the stuff that I can't watch as a podcaster. Because on my main show, No More Room in Hell, we do a lot of more classic horror. You're not really going to see reviews of like Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween on that show.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for a review of Executive Koala, that is definitely the place to go. So
I'm the same way. And I've even had to tell my viewers, it's like, don't ask me to get into a typical, toxic fandom war. And it's like, I don't want to burn bridges with how everyone is about the comic books and Star Wars and Halloween. So yeah, please give us something that's like, hey, remember there were these two vampire cult films in the 90s, or there were, or this other film that no one else knew was a franchise that wasn't by Full Moon but was on a bunch of video store shelves. There's got to be some kind of cult franchise. And to some of this whole cult franchise, yeah, it is kind of empowering. I was like, it's a movie trivia show, it's a movie riffing show, it's a campy sci-fi horror show, and then it's also it pretty much, it's a film buff show in many ways, because this is like, man, is like they're thinking everything I think when I see a awful blockbuster that had no reason to be bad. And
exactly.
One
of the things I've always appreciated about MST is that they're not always just making fun of the films. Like they genuinely like a lot of the films that they riff. They talk all the time on like behind the scenes interviews how they'll see movies that are just too bad even for MST. Like they just can't make it funny because the movie is just so awful. Some people might say that a couple of those films actually did slip into the seasons here and there, but I mean, there really is love there with riffing. You're not riffing stuff that you absolutely hate, because that's not fun ultimately. So yeah, the fact that these guys do have a background in the golden age of Hollywood and old classic sci-fi horror monster films just kind of adds to that appeal. So yeah,
absolutely.
We are their people, definitely.
Totally. So we don't have to have any kind of top 10 list or anything. What were some? I'll start with the first. The one that started it all. So what are some MST3k episodes that you find yourself, for better or worse, just kind of just replaying even more, or you just recall even seeing more times than you wanted to? Because there would always be a time where it's like, hey, I can see they struggled with this, taking on this episode, or I've seen that movie way more times than I care to, but I can see why some find it funny, because it's like it makes it okay to suffer with them, because you're just like, yeah, someone in Louisiana or Connecticut or Carolinas, just decided, hey, let's make a movie I have no business making, and then what you got is what made a lot of people guffaw at a drive-in opening night. So yeah,
it happens.
It happens.
But I mean, yeah, as far as favorites go, what's funny is I have done top 10 lists in the past, both for RiffTrax and MST, just for, random conversations I've had with people, because this is honestly the first time I've gotten a chance to talk MST on a podcast. So I am extremely excited right now.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
But our favorites, I mean, I think my wife and I kind of have common likes for our favorites. Obviously, I already mentioned the movie. Aside from the movie, obviously because of that experience, and then I mean we've watched it umpteen times since then. I've owned it on every physical format it's been on: VHS, Laserdisc. I
definitely rented it at least 3 times. Yeah.
Exactly. So obviously that's going to be probably an all-time favorite for us. But as far as the weekly episodes, I mean, we just watched The Final Sacrifice last night, which an absolute favorite episode for me. Actually, my favorite Mystery Science Theater song is from that episode. So yeah,
it's funny you mentioned this is the first time to really talk on here, because this is actually kind of how I actually formed the podcast when it first started. I was like, who are some Misties online in a group who like to talk about goofy movies online?
Awesome. Yes, absolutely.
But I mean, that's just it, because like those guys are generally kind of pretty cool. Like, I think the fan base is pretty cool. Yes, you're going to see some toxic guys, shitting on I hate this host and all that, but it's pretty minor compared to, say, especially compared to Rick and Morty or Star Wars, where people bitch for hours and you're like, are you guys still going?
No, it's true. I mean, obviously, as a horror movie podcaster, we deal with that constantly. I do have to agree with you, though. I think the Mystery Science Theater community is one of the friendliest communities out there. In fact, I've never run into any kind of toxic fandom when dealing with Misties. I'm in a couple of Misty chats on Facebook. I've been part of groups before, online watch parties, and honestly, I've yet to meet asshole number one. So rock on at Misties.
I've encountered a few that were kind of control freaks in certain groups, as well as ones who were like, let's not make fun of this or that. I'm like, well, the person who posted this meme was making fun of another meme that was making, that Joel or Mike or Crow or Servo or Gypsy or Magic Voice even, just was mentioning. It's like, and occasionally I would see some of them be like, oh, I'm disappointed that they would make fun of this or that. I'm like, nothing is off limits.
Absolutely. No.
And like you say, there's plenty of times where it's like, I mean, I love how the first camera episode they go, that movie wasn't half bad. It's like they acknowledge at times when there's like they're not having a unpleasant time, they're just would rather be doing something else in outer space. But yeah, in character, out of character, and even when RiffTrax has gotten a little over the top, it hasn't ever just been to the point where you're like, yeah, but they're just being dicks. And it's like, no, they're just, they're doing all kinds of humor and testing it out, and whatever jokes make them laugh the most, they're going to put those in there. And I mean, it was definitely a lot of fun, especially when we get to those, how they kind of had a few different deals with Lionsgate and Sony to license some of their better known movies. So
yeah, I'm I mean, even when you speak to filmmakers who've had their stuff riffed by Mystery Science Theater or RiffTrax, it's always like a loving experience. No one ever walks away. No director has ever walked away angry that MST, makes fun of their movie.
Oh, really?
I mean, there's special, yeah. When you have the old box sets, the old DVD box sets, some of them will have behind the scenes interviews with like directors.
I did see some of those, but especially War of the Lost World and such. But I know Saul Bass, I think, who did Squirm, wasn't too.
Oh, really?
He was even going to town, like complaining on the IMDb message boards when that was a thing. But
that's hysterical. I mean, he did make Squirm though, so.
That's true. And I know Joe Don Baker was a rumor, but I don't think that was ever confirmed. I think it was just Mike freaking out because he happened to find a hotel and he's like, I think that's Joe Don Baker. Oh shit, I better not go near him.
But yeah, like recently I listened to an interview with the director of Hobgoblins, and he loves their episode. I mean, he tells people to watch it. He's constantly, check out the MST episode. It's amazing. So yeah, some people love it.
Yeah, and even when he was mocked, he's like, I see why they did that. I just thought it was a little too over the top, but yeah, see it. And it is so wild how you would have. They've kind of tried to track down every kind of movie he's done. I know they worked a lot. They pretty much just licensed all the movies made by the Time Chasers guy.
Yep.
I know Graydon Clark kind of was spoken about in a book saying, I would like to see some residuals from this once in a while, but I think he's come around. He's like, yeah, hey, you know my movie from somewhere, whether it's on antenna channels or that show, so that's fine.
Hey, any exposure is good exposure.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, when they did the live final tour and they did The Brain, which was a Canadian shocker mixed in with an edited down version of Deathstalker 2 of all movies, is like, okay, so Jim Wynorski of all schlocksters is opening up. And they would always joke, I'd see him on Facebook joke for the longest time, we haven't been featured on there yet. So it's like, some of them are definitely good sports, and then there are others who is like, oh my goodness, people, just take a chill pill. It's called, comedy, but so the Final Sacrifice, I think that is definitely one that got replayed a lot, and people just ended up just finding the character who, just very amusing. It's like, they're kind of carrying the movie with their wackiness.
Exactly. I mean, between the wacky hero Zap Rosdower and the wacky villain Sakaris, I mean, how can you not love this episode? It's goofy. I would imagine even the director of the film himself looks at it today and is like, yeah, it's kind of silly.
Oh, and it was even wackier how some collectors of the show like to even track down all the movies that have been featured on there uncut. Even do their own kind of mocking B-movie show, and it's like, this is under a totally different title that has nothing to do with the movie, and the actors on the poster aren't even in the actual movie. Friends of the show, Comeuppance Reviews, always are doing a bunch of, I talked about them on the Horror Returns, but they've done a bunch of different video store shelves stories, and I know they at one point came across this and they're like, we've seen this movie, but wait, we know it under the other title that's featured on MST. So I think it is kind of wild how, for a movie that was handled with so much care, is like the actors really wanted to carry it, and it just kind of falls into that. Is like the main lead is kind of annoying, and the other guy is just a drunk with a shotgun. So it's like, it's a pretty wacky mix.
I mean, those people in that movie are barely actors, though. A lot of them were literally just grabbed from the local community. It's the same story with like a Troll 2, where they're just hiring local people who just happen to be on the set that day. Hey, can you act?
And I'm even surprised when I looked at the trivia how there wasn't any like talk about like a French Canadian director who didn't speak proper English or anything. It's like and the main actor, I think his name is coincidentally Cameron somewhere, but I think he was like even as a featured extra in like an episode of Band of Brothers, but that was as good.
Yeah.
as lucrative as he got. A favorite of mine that I know many adore is probably Pod People.
That's the next one I would have brought up.
Perfect. To just bring an extra ET, and I mean, they couldn't even, edit out any of the gore. It's like, yeah, it's that over the top of movie, but like that music he keeps playing, Mr. Trumpy, is like, yeah, it's like that's some weird, wacky music.
Yeah, I mean that's an odd little score in general. There's like equal parts electronic music, and then there's a Ringo Starr song for no reason.
Yeah, this is like,
Times.
and I mean, it's just, and I know the guy who's like playing the sheriff is like Frank Branagh, who was in a bunch of those spaghetti westerns. He's like one of the guys in one of the main saloon in the second part of the Man with No Name trilogy. It's like, yeah,
Nice.
it was Italian made, but yeah, I think it is even funnier how this and a bunch of the other ones, it wasn't a Sandy Frank production, but it was like some other producer company, and it's like they would use unrelated movies that the companies own to just make a totally confusing, opening credits. It's like, why are you doing this?
Giving us opening credits from an entirely different movie. Good times.
Uh-huh. Good times. The more confusion, the more the merrier. What's your take on Cave Dwellers?
Oh God, Ator. Come on.
Yeah,
Ator the Flying Eagle. How could you
Flying
not love
Eagle.
Ator? I mean, how much O'Keefe did they need for that episode? Miles.
A lot.
Oh God.
Miles.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, another absolute favorite. I mean, sword and sandal movies in general are fun, Beastmaster type stuff. So
Absolutely.
oh God, I mean,
Fantasy.
Warriors of the Lost World is another great one.
Yes, you got V'ger himself from Star Trek and Terminator guy, and they didn't know they just weren't finding his performance all that compelling because he's just a simple grunt in a lot of the movies he did, and so it's just so funny. They're like, that paper chase guy, what happened?
The paper chase guy.
And for Mike Nelson to even make a cameo in there as like the giant machine that lasts like two different scenes briefly is like as mega weapon.
Mega weapon.
But yeah, I mean, I think they were even cruel to the director a bit. They're like, David, worthless. But yeah, it's like you want to talk about no common sense. It's like he gets beat up by a bunch of wrestler guys, savages who have nothing to do with the rest of the movie, and then he abandons her, and then he comes back for her. I'm like, why did you abandon her? Like,
Yeah. Very little of that movie makes sense.
Oh goodness.
Including the title, for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean,
Who's the warrior? And is it a Lost World? Yeah. It's. Oh man. How much but yeah, I do think a lot of the Hercules and post-apocalyptic type movies got very underappreciated. I mean, definitely a lot of people saw them, but it's like most people would just kind of cling on to the, just a lot of the atypical ones, like
sure.
Marooned, which was, an award-winning all-star cast movie that many were just finding very dull, and it's just kind of funny because we kind of have that scenario now when we see something that wins all the awards, and we're like, I'd rather not see this.
Yeah.
Well, what's your take on Fugitive Alien, where they just, much like that in Time of the Apes, they had just like, hey, Sandy Frank's gonna edit a bunch of Japanese shows together and try and make it make coherent sense. It's not going to. It's going to feel like 3 episodes on one VHS tape,
Exactly, man. I experienced way too much Sandy Frank when I was a kid, way more than I really want to admit. For some reason, the local New York channel aired a lot of that Sandy Frank stuff. And
Yeah.
I didn't know the name at the time. I was younger, but it's like now it's like, holy shit, I remember watching all of this.
Yeah. Oh man. And I mean, I had a family that wasn't surprised to see Gamera, be really heavily featured on here, let alone, the Godzillas, because those were antenna channel staples. You would turn it a certain way and you'd get some kind of giant monster fighting, or if it wasn't syndicated, TV shows.
Yeah, a lot of royalty-free stuff or stuff where licenses just kind of expired and no one cared about it. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I know people who grew up on The Master, that Lee Van Cleef show that was featured on here. It was just like,
Oh yes.
and it didn't matter if they thought it was good or not. They're just like, it's just you've never seen it. Lee Van Cleef as a samurai master, It was, yeah, I mean, and it is kind of funnier though too, because half the time you look at these movies and you're like, I secretly want someone to remake these on a bigger budget and see what they can do.
The thing is that I wouldn't want them to remake these movies with the intention of trying to make them good, though. But at the same time, if they purposely try to make it bad, then it just comes off as cheesy. A lot of these MST movies, I mean, they're time capsules. They're just the perfect movie for when they were released to make us, as many of us, laugh as possible. I mean, I don't think you could redo Pod People. I mean, you could, but somebody would make the aliens look way too good. God forbid there'd be CG in it.
Right.
And it just wouldn't come off as unintentionally funny, because that's the thing. All these movies that MST and RiffTrax goes after, we look at them as, oh, that's a bad movie, but the filmmakers weren't trying to make a bad movie. It unintentionally became that. And you can't reproduce that. I mean, look at some of the modern directors, like an Anthony Iterante, the guy who does the Sharknado movies. It's like his last movie, Zombie Tidal Wave, was fucking awful. Because he tried to make something funny. He tried to make a parody, and it's like, nah, dude, try to make a serious movie so that we can laugh at it. That's what we want. I think
the biggest issue is, like you say, a lot of them are intentionally bad, and because they're really not good at most anything, and so it's just like, it's like you're wasting your time. And I was kind of glad when RiffTrax kind of stopped doing that after a while. They just like, okay, we'll do the first 2 Sharknadoes, and then we're not going to do any more of this silent stuff. I'm like, thanks, because that was kind of cheap.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's an easy one for those guys. It's almost too easy. Low-hanging fruit. Why bother? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, those movies are funny enough without RiffTrax. That's the thing. I mean, like, I wouldn't want to watch a RiffTrax of, say, Blazing Saddles, because I want to fucking watch Blazing Saddles. I don't want to hear those guys making fun of it. Mm. But if you're talking about Tommy Wiseau's The Room, yeah, give me all the riffs.
That was definitely one of my favorite live experiences. I'd already seen a synced up version of the movie, and to see them, they really did good at not only delivering the same jokes, but just as good. But then, you're seeing, because it's HD, you're seeing stuff that you never seen, before, and they added to it. They're like, why would the most key moment be out of focus? And it's just like, and it just reminded us when we read the book, that, the Mark portrayer, Greg's Sotero, is it?
Sereno? I think so, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, is like he talked about, is like, that movie was $30 million and it looks like a, cheapo, skin flick that you'd see on Lifetime or Skinamax, and it's like, and the fact that it was promoted as a comedy just to even get more, people to see it, and many comedians ended up guffawing about it, and it became their Rocky Horror in a way. And it's like, it was like, but the live presentation was great because, like, they updated some even more jokes. Like, it was before Weinstein, so that was a missed opportunity. But they were able to add, some Fred Durst jokes, some Bill Cosby jokes, and just make fun of, just again, Tommy, you're really creepy.
Exactly. I mean, they just did it recently with Hobgoblins. Obviously, they already have a riff of Hobgoblins available. They just did a new live RiffTrax recently, like literally last month, I think.
I think so.
And the new jokes, were spectacular. At one point, I almost pissed myself. There was one, I can't remember what the joke was, but there was one new gag right around the middle of the movie that just, I lost it. I was probably that obnoxious guy laughing way too loud in the movie.
That would be me too.
That's another thing that me and the wife are very loyal to, are the RiffTrax live events. I think we've been to every one since Jack the Giant Slayer. That was the first one.
Perfect. So 2013, you've been going. Yeah, nice. Yeah. That's about when I started, I think. And I went twice to the live Starship Troopers one, and that was just great because, I got to see a movie I already like, remastered, and then, the jokes were very, very clever. Like when they're in the practice session, the Toy Story Army attacks. And I know the one that got the most audience cheer, both with the live audience and the on-screen live audience, was when, they're at the end of one of the final attacks, the grenade, fight. And I love how it's like, it's either Mike or Kevin that or Bill that quips. I think it was Bill, but it might actually be Mike. But he just says, David Cronenberg's A Bug's Life. I was like, this perfectly sums up this movie.
Damn right.
Oh man. But I would meet some very interesting people there because I would bring a Tom Servo puppet I bought off eBay, and
Nice.
it was very intriguing to see like people who didn't even know anything about the show but knew what it was kind of about, and just like there were people who went to the live version of Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, and they were like, we saw this right here in this very town back in the day, and so we can't believe what a whack. It's still just as wacky as we remembered it. It was the Christmas special where we were laughing at for the wrong reasons. I'm like, so see, everyone always kind of I think TV definitely did help a lot in many ways. It's kind of like the movie they would even reference in every episode that I'm surprised they never did, like Killdozer, whereas like there were always those weird movies that you would grow up knowing about, and you're like, I don't think I've actually seen that, or I remember that when I was 5. What's been your favorite of the live events? Do you think they've done a good job of just kind of not only remastering movies but really making sure the material appeals to just about anybody?
Honestly, my absolute favorite live riff has to be Birdemic.
That was
ultimately
my first one too.
Birdemic by itself is a hysterical movie without any of the riffs, but those guys that night live were absolutely on fire. I mean, I think that's another example where I left with a stomach ache. I was too. Laughing so hard. My God.
I bought a hot dog or some stuff, and I was like, fuck, that's so funny. But yeah, I mean, and even seeing, have you seen any of those movies signed with the Mads moments? I mean,
yes.
The audience interaction really is good. Like, there will be times where they'll flub their lines and they'll riff themselves, and like, whoa, hey, okay, I didn't expect this to be that kind of show. But
oh man, I like where it doesn't happen often enough, but yeah, every now and then, like, or every few movies, you might get Kevin say one of his lines like in the wrong spot during a live performance, and he'll be like, oh wait, no, that's in a few seconds, and then he'll say it again, and it's like, was it funny that time?
Yes. He will remind the audience to laugh. He's always kind of even. He pretty much, Bill will always be kind of the guy who like kind of starts a premise, and then Mike will ask a question saying, well, I don't think anyone's seen that kind of bad movie. And then Kevin will often finish it and lose his shit. And it's a perfect ensemble.
Yeah, they've been working together so long that even when they mess up, it's absolutely hysterical. I mean, there is no messing up for those three guys.
Oh, totally. And and sometimes they're like, Kevin, did you see that movie? You watch more shit than any of us. Was it any good? Cinematic Titanic you saw so many sides of Jay Elvis. It's like, man,
yes.
I never knew he could do that. And as a result, I've checked out his stand-up CDs he had, and as well as Jonah Ray's CDs. And I was like, man, these guys were grooving. I'd known all of them who they were before because they did other side projects, and
right.
But it's like, man, I would pay to see them come to town. But with Frank and Trace, I mean, actually being in the theater with us and kind of interacting with us, that was wonderful, because I mean, they did God, what was that weird Vincent Price movie? It's like a little. It's kind of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The Tingler. Tonight's movie was. They would often do a lot of the same movies per state, and then they would change it up. Like, meanwhile, in this state. But like at one point, like they were harping on some of the bad movies that year. I know Trace was Frank was like, "Oh, this movie smells worse than Baywatch," and I think Trace made a quip about Valerian, and me and some other guys were like, "Ooh, ouch!" And Trace just actually turned around to us. "Oh, did I hurt your Valerian feelings?"
One of my favorite crossover comments they've done is when they did the Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And the first time Robert Pattinson walks in and they go, "Sparkly vampire, fall in love with it." I fucking lost it.
Oh yeah, you can tell that, anyone who thinks they improvise is like, no, it's not like Whose Line. It's not like some even the funnier moments of SNL or Mad TV Goof. No, it's like, no, they had to watch this every time, and other people would dictate it for them. Like, you've even seen the behind the scenes documentaries. It's like, yeah, they're having to make note, and there's plenty of times where there's like certain parts of whatever they're reviewing, you'll see that they're just laughing. It's like, I can't even begin to imagine what I'll say during the scene.
Yeah, and I couldn't imagine that process. I mean, having to watch a movie like we'll watch an episode of MST or RiffTrax, and with the comments in it, and we'll laugh and think it's funny, blah blah blah. But these poor guys, man, they're watching these terrible movies like 20 to 30 times to write out all these jokes and everything else. It's like, could you imagine having to watch like Red Zone Cuba 30 times? I would put a bullet in my brain.
I mean, you have to love what you do, and I mean, that's all they did for a living. So I mean,
exactly. I mean, hey, hopefully they made good livings on it, because man, everybody thinks it's so easy. Oh, you just watch a movie and make jokes, and it's like, all right, well, you do it. And then when someone tries, they always look ridiculous because they don't know what the hell they're doing. It's hard to be witty on the spot for an hour and a half, So obviously, you got to rewrite a lot of these jokes.
I would see occasional non-fans of the show say, if I wanted to make fun of a movie, I'd make up my own commentary, and it's like bull fucking shit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I actually do commentaries with one of my podcasts, and it's still not easy. I mean, we still go off topic and start having like 10-minute tangents that have nothing to do with the movie we're talking about.
It's hard.
So yeah, it's not easy remotely.
They would sometimes do that too. Oh, that's right. What are we talking about? Oh yeah, we're supposed to be watching this movie. We all can't stand a minute of. But yeah, I mean, there are moments like that where you're like, oh man, I think it was during Mike when he was first going solo, he did do a perfect riff of Predator.
Yes.
Like, anytime you hear the music, he's like, I should be doing something productive right now. I should be going to the gym. I should be dun. I should be going out and buying groceries. Dun.
Have you had a chance to watch any of the Bridget and Mary Jo stuff that they've been releasing lately?
I haven't yet. I need to so bad. And I when I saw that they were taking on Gravity and just other movies that were kind of pretentious chick flicks or just nutty, just like movies, I'm like, oh, I'm sure they're gonna sneak in everything from fake British accents to Downton Abbey impressions to just all kinds of stuff.
If you or any of the listeners have an Amazon Prime account, they actually, one of the Mary Jo and I forgot her name. Bridget and Mary Jo. One of their episodes is free on Amazon Prime. It's a Christmas shorts special, and it's none of the same shorts that the RiffTrax guys did on their Christmas shorts spectacular.
Yeah, they haven't done too many repeats. I know when they first started out, I mean, there was a solo version of Night of the Living Dead and House on Haunted Hill, and then when they started doing the live stuff, you're like, okay, we gotta, change up the movies now. And
exactly.
I think they've done a pretty good job of most of the rehashes of certain ones, like, Monos and Santa Claus. They had totally different riffs, so it's like, okay, so it's a totally different episode. The only one, I know this isn't popular with some people, I did not care for, just because the original episode was just like the definition of classic, Mystery Science Theater for me was probably Space Mutiny. I just, for whatever reason, I just thought them going with the uncut version was just kind of, it makes it an even rougher sit, and I didn't care for some of the riffs that time.
I can see that, yeah. I mean, obviously the first couple of times you watch the MST edition of Space Mutiny, it's so freaking funny. I mean, just the scenes of them just giving Red Brown's character names, Big
Oh
McLarge
yeah.
huge. I mean, the first time you experience that, it's amazing. It's going to be really hard to reproduce that for the live show. Thankfully, they didn't really harp on that too much, but you're right. I mean, the live wasn't nearly as funny as the MST version, but still well worth the money in my opinion.
Oh yeah, and I mean, they always do some very fun, just like intros to every show where they got Weird Al doing some music playing, from one of his more recent albums and some wacky trivia.
Yep. Oh, the
Uh,
pregame. Yeah, you always got to get there early for a RiffTrax live event.
Oh, totally. And it's not hard. The theaters are never crowded, and it really does. It is a lot of fun to also just like, just you can kind of even get an idea of who wrote which one. I'm pretty sure that's a Mike Quip, or that's probably a Kevin riff.
Yeah.
I forget which one that was kind of Halloween themed, but it was around that time, and I remember there was one funny one I took a photo of where it was like, instead of watching Candyman free, just say his name 3 times or some shit. It's like they would do all other sorts of just like pop culture references.
Yep.
It's like, I think that's just it. The right people get it. And I mean, do you think there's even some underappreciated later Comedy Central episodes? I mean, they did Night of the Blood Beast twice, once for
Right.
Thanksgiving, and it's like to where it's like they would even have like alternate like host segments on certain DVDs for just show you what the syndicated versions were like, where
Right.
just playing the poor guy from Biography.
Oh God, yeah. Mike's impression of that dude is spectacular. Oh my God.
Totally. And I mean, even it's even funnier when you look at how they even kind of get around the different portrayals. It's like, yep, we had a voice change on Crow.
Yeah, you got to deal with that a few times over the course of the franchise.
I didn't think Jay Elvis was that bad as Servo. I mean, I never could really tell, and except on further rewatches. But it's
Sure.
like, but yeah, I mean, it's just so funny though too how every time you've gone through the series, how many times did they totally entirely try to escape the theater?
Mm-hmm. Yep. You never know who's there,
If you had a number, do you think it's like 5 times they've attempted to, or they come in late?
That's a tough one, yeah. I mean, they always make a big old gag about it, so yeah.
Right. My oxygen just got cut off. I had to go back in. I got electrocuted.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to a few other ones. I kind of feel like Robot versus the Aztec Mummy is just so goofy.
Yeah,
And-
that is an odd one. That one and Robot Monster, those are two
And
that
I
are
got
like.
those both mixed up for the longest time, and I was just
I
like,
think I did too, actually. Now that I think about it.
it's like just because of the title and not at all because of the content. I mean, Robot Monster is way more of a mad scientist movie, and this one is just it's randomly set in Egypt, and and they're making fun of a lot of the simple stuff, the scantily clad people, the art direction. So it's like, yeah, that's my kind of deal. I like how the riffs are very multiple. It doesn't struggle as much as in any season where it's like, not quite sure I got that entire pop culture reference. It's like,
Oh man, another one that I really like. It's a really oddball one. I actually tried to watch it without the MST riffs once, and it's kind of a little bit of a drag. But Overdrawn at the Memory Bank with
Oh,
Raul Julia.
God.
I am a huge fan of Raul Julia, so I gravitate towards this episode.
Great
The
actor.
movie itself, though, is so freaking weird.
Right. And I think someone did at one time even show is like you can get the VHS. It was just a PBS production. You're like,
Yeah,
really?
it looks like an absolute like cheap production TV film. Absolutely.
Right.
With,
They're using
like
a video camera.
Exactly, video toaster effects. Oh my god, classic '90s editing, so fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is an oddball one. I'm a big fan of Casablanca, so I dig the Casablanca references throughout the film, and I am a fan of Raul Julia in general. So I mean, I just I could watch him in anything, almost anything. I don't need to see Street Fighter again, but Overdrawn in memory bank all day long.
Oh, totally. And okay, so it was a 1983 episode of American Playhouse. Okay.
83, okay.
Shit.
Yeah,
I
makes
thought
sense.
it was 90s too, but I think that's just it. I just got it mixed up because it was a 96 episode. So I was like,
Oh, yeah, that's valid. Yep.
but yeah, it is just definitely one of those where you're like, yeah, I like the concept. This should totally be like a cyberpunk, dream come true, and it's just a mess. Oh God.
It's just classic cinema come to life.
Someone even has it listed as a comedy on IMDb. Oh, get out of here.
Ooh, that's a reach, but I mean unintentional, sure, but
Oh God. What about I Accused My Parents?
oh, great one, classic.
Because obviously we'll talk endlessly about Mitchell, but like this was just an interesting one because it's like it could have totally worked as like a gangster movie, and then it's just you got the whiny, unlikable character framing, like
that was one of the first VHSs I ever bought. Because obviously in the 90s we didn't have our DVDs sets yet, but yeah, they had the individual episodes on VHS. They only had like 6 to 8 of them, and yeah, I think that was one of the first ones I bought. That and Ega.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and then just having the usual heavy-handed propaganda messages, just thrown in there, and it's like that totally distracts from the narrative. And I'll tell you, that villain, that actor who's playing him, he's just awesome. It's like you just want to see him just choose scenery. He looks like a mix between, I don't know if you could say David Nevin, but he has kind of that Basil Rathbone kind of look and feel.
Yeah.
Seeing him, just this is his attempt at being a Edward G. Robinson, Humphrey Bogart type, and the movie is just letting him down, and yet he each time he's on screen is like he really does a lot with a premise that you really can't do much with.
No, incredibly thin premise.
I gotta try going for Daddy-O again. I recall that being another one where a petty person we have to follow for the whole time.
Yeah, man, there's some episodes that I really don't return to that often. Daddy-O is definitely one of them. I mentioned Red Zone Cuba earlier.
Oh, anything by Coleman Francis, yeah.
Oh, yeah, all 3 Coleman Francis movies. Avoid those like the plague. Oh, man. I mean,
it was so funny, though, with the skydivers, because I always end up I have like maybe free copies of it in my house, and it's not because I wanted to. It was because of one of those Mill Creek, Anchor Bay, multiple movie packs, and someone sneaks it on there every time. It's like, who wants to see this movie?
oh man, yeah. Coleman Francis.
There was even parts of it where I'm like, I just totally zoned out. I'm like, you guys are funny, but boy, howdy. But I guffawed because given the recent political turmoil we have, there was some very stuff that was just so true back in the 90s that I was guffawing. I think Servo says it's like, and this, ladies and gents, is the latest NRA convention. I'm like, oh, shit. Oh, my God. I was like, I'm definitely getting some violent testosterone here from this awful movie. Oh, man. Do you also kind of find that, like, some of these, like, could easily be Twilight Zone Star Trek episodes, and yet this is, like, it makes you wonder why they were rejected, Did no one know what to make of them?
I could see that, absolutely.
Oh man, there was another one. I forgot what it was, but it was one of the ones that had Cameron Mitchell in it.
Oh boy. Oh, Space. No, we already talked about Space Mutiny. So, what was the other one with Mitchell? Damn it.
He was playing an evil corporate bad guy, and it was just so funny. It's like it was like NBC TV movie of the week, and it was just. I think my problem is too, my folks used to be up for it, but now my mother gets too wrapped up into the movie and the cheesiness. I'm like, please multitask better. It's like you're not supposed to be paying attention to it all. And she started asking me plot hole questions. I'm like, no one knows. I've just started this. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Definitely.
But, okay, well, let's go to. Oh yeah, City Limits. I don't think it's talked about enough.
No, that definitely doesn't get talked about enough.
It's like, oh, man, I mean, to even just even begin to sum it up. I mean, you got just such a bizarre cast. I mean, when Trace Ballou introduces it as James Earl Jones back when he needed the money or some shit like that. It's kind of a fun, stupid movie at times if you really want to have fun with it, but it is also one of those where you're like, yeah, there's also a lot of dead space in here, and it just began, Crow's infatuation with Kim Cattrall, and it's like, yeah, that's pretty funny. And
Yeah. I remember, what was that? The Bronx Warriors, right?
yes, Trash is my dude. And
Yes, Trash.
that
Exactly.
episode, it's like they had like a Lionsgate issue with it, and I'm like, I can't believe it, because it's been both that and the first one have been released multiple times on Blu-ray. I'm like, God, why can't we have a DVD copy of this episode? Because I really do, enjoy Mike's impression of the character Silvio, who's like a comedic, an intentionally funny guy in the movie. And most people watching this, it's so funny. It had the title Escape 2000, which made people think it had something to do with this other Australian post-apocalyptic movie under the same name, and no such luck. But then it's like most people didn't know it was a sequel, and most people who watch the episode think that character actually does die for real, and it turns out he actually survives the movie, but they didn't know, because it's like they have only the TV edit of the movie. So it's just so funny how they kind of acknowledge it too, with him just like hitting on Pearl back when she was disabled, and just Dr. Forster's, we only knew her as Dr. Forster's mom, and she's like,
Right.
Clayton, and he's like, hey, who's this guy? Oh man. Do you have
another.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say another absolute favorite of ours here, and it's not because it's necessarily a good movie. Obviously, not a very good movie, but just the riffs are so stellar, and that's Werewolf. I adore as bad, and I recognize how awful that movie is.
Oh yeah.
But the riffs are so good. I mean, I could listen to that woman try to pronounce werewolf all day. Warwolf. What? Warwolf?
Werewolf. Yeah. Oh
good.
man. And I'm actually good friends with Joe Estevez.
Oh, awesome. Oh,
Haven't
we love
talked
Joe
to him in
Estevez
forever.
here.
Oh yeah.
Soul Taker, hell yeah.
Oh yeah. And how much does anything really star Joe Estevez? I realize that's from Soul Taker, but yeah, it's another good one too. Is like those were just very, very cheap VHS era movies, and it's like Soul Taker somehow got like screened at like a festival, and it was just so blasphemous how someone wrote a review saying it was a better movie than Ghost. It's like, what? No. And for Werewolf is like, it didn't have anything other than Richard Lynch as a draw, and if you look at the VHS, for the longest time you could see that it was like a morphing VHS poster. And I mean, yeah, I can't recommend that movie at all. Supposedly it had a graphic sex scene, but I have I've not been able to find that on any regular cut of the movie, except like a Spanish version back when Mega Upload was a thing. So I was just like, yeah, this movie is an absolute drag. You've got a Russian guy who doesn't speak much English playing the title character / villain ?
Yeah.
And I mean, just one of the most. It was kind of a big deal because that and another movie we'll get to, and were just like the most recent movies, to be featured on the show. So it really kind of was becoming kind of an unofficial honor, is like to see. And I think it was one interview either on the DVDs and even in other stuff over the years, how they, pretty much some of these movies actually would get aired on USA Network at times. And so they would say, hey,
oh yeah,
it makes better sense to just give it to them. So then make double the time people will watch the movie. But yeah, I mean, it's like that is like, I mean, they had done VHS era movies before. One that I think kind of got overlooked during late Comedy Central era was probably Deathstalker Free, The Warriors from Hell. And that movie I actually credit with making me get back religiously into watching the show a lot, because I'm already a B movie fanatic to begin with, so it's like, yeah, why am I not watching this show in quite a while? And I think you kind of do get that phase where, I don't know, like, you really do have to actually be in the mood for it, because and there would be a time where you're like, I can't handle any stupid movies today. I can't. But there are other times where it's like, well, if you're going to, you might as well go with this.
It's funny you bring up Deathstalker too, because on my movie commentary podcast, we've actually done the first 2 Deathstalkers and are contemplating doing 3.
Oh man, 3 would be interesting, because I would like to see what. I mean, people find the sword fight so spectacularly bad in that one, because it's just very, however it's choreographed, it just looks not so well rehearsed. Yeah. And theater actors trying to make it work with plastic swords, but it's just funny too, because that's when they get the most rowdy. Mike even lets out a "get to the choppers" line, but and I recognize the guy who played Deathstalker that time. He became, he was kind of just a low rent 80s hunk, and after briefly being in a few Roger Corman productions, he kind of just became just kind of a recurring guest star on various other shows. So it's like, it is kind of funny seeing some of these actors who we know now from hit shows who are on some of the best episodes of this show. Not in a great light, but yeah, it's like that some people have even, what I find very interesting is gone, like, matched up the dialogue of like those scenes and match it up with like the NHD copy of the uncut movie, and it's an even bigger experience. And one guy who did that a lot did it with Deathstalker 3, is like remaster the uncut sword fight but putting the dialogue over that scene over it, and I'm like, oh, awesome. So I'm seeing this in HD uncut. Wow. And while I'm missing the silhouettes, it's still a lot of fun to just hear their voices well.
Hell yeah.
Oh man. Operation Kid Rudder does not get enough love. So to honor Neil Connery, that's right, a brother of Sean Connery, who starred in an Italian James Bond / sequel / meta parody. I was like, I honored him by watching it that week, and I was like, man, oh, what a movie.
I seem to be crossing that one in my head with 007.
I think so. It's like, I think it goes under 2 different titles. They had to.
Oh, is that double? Okay, so all right, that makes sense. Because yeah,
you said with all the arrows and the random just cat circus in the middle of the desert.
Possibly, yeah.
But the spy
when it comes to those like Super Dragon, Secret Agent Super Dragon, and Agent 007, I tend to, because they're all spy thrillers from the 60s, I tend to kind of mismatch which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's hard to tell them apart from the other, but I kind of do have kind of a love of those kind of goofy movies to begin with, because it's like, if they weren't referencing Bond, then they were referencing likely other stuff that was like an ongoing thing, like even stuff from Europe, like Largo Winch. So it is kind of fun, because it's like, some of those movies are very confusing, and yet you kind of are having fun just because they just are kind of goofy. Like, one of them's basically, and a lot of them still do to this day even get shown on antenna channels. There was one that was basically, rumor was on the street that it became an unofficially remade as Moonraker or something like that. I'm like, Jesus. Really? It was like, so the Broccoli, and the other producers, Alberto, whoever, of the Bond franchise, were looking at the knockoffs and get an idea. So like,
that's funny.
It's kind of like with the whole Jaws thing, how it's like Spielberg hired Joe Dante to do some of movies for him when he's like, yeah, Piranha's the best Jaws parody.
Yep. Absolutely.
So it is kind of wild how it's like, you are, like you say, you're getting a textbook, and It's like, and in some cases, this is the only way you'll be able to see certain versions of these certain movies. Like, you'd have to probably pay like $5,000 to get some of them,
Mm-hmm.
uncut. Oh goodness. Oh goodness. Did you see? Well, you've seen it all, obviously, but did you notice during? Okay, so which one? This is kind of apples and oranges, but which one do you think just? Which Joe Don Baker venture gives you more belly aching laughs? Is it Mitchell or Final Justice?
Man, that's almost unfair. I probably am gonna go with Mitchell because I just think the riffs are a little bit tighter there. I don't know. It almost seems like the guys are actually a fan of the film because they're so like on point with a lot of their like riffs.
Right. What would
I,
basically be a Perry Mason or Rockford Files episode is just a very over the top revenge fest. And there's one clip I saw on there that was like one of the bumpers when they were doing like the marathons. And at one point, Trace is saying, is like, Joe Don Baker, I mean, he's just one hell of an actor. And then he just starts freezing for a minute and just making a bunch of other unrelated riffs. And it's like, Mitchell. Oh, man, Mitchell. But yeah, I mean, they did say in like a more recent Q&A, like from 2016 when they were doing that get together, entire MST3K cast reunited on RiffTrax style, is like they were promoting it at one panel, and it was a lot of fun seeing Trace and Frank just like kind of reconfirm is like, once again, we're not a film criticism format, we're just a movie watching platform that's a comedy show. And it is so funny how they're like, it's like, we grew up liking Joe Don Baker. He was excellent in that miniseries where he played the Colonel, Army of Edge of Darkness. And it was like, but it was either the character who's a douchebag or just how he portrayed that guy. Just with that movie just wasn't a likable title character. And but they did mention how, Frank did a lot of the movie picks, Mike did a lot of the writing, and Joel did, the Avenging Exchanges, and the host segment kind of platforms. Let's have a recurring, theme where someone, some character from the movie visits us.
I mean, I used to love when they, like, early on with the Joel years and even with the early Mike years too, I guess the Comedy Central years in general, where they would do like little segments like that incorporating characters from the movies. What I wasn't the biggest fan of is towards the end of the series when they started doing like continuing storylines with the host segments, I for the most part, don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed all the Roman stuff and all the Pearl trying to take over and everything else. But sometimes, like, especially if you're watching the show for the first time and you're not quite watching them in order, you almost lose the context of the story. Like, if you're watching it as it airs, I guess it's cool. But I that was probably the only thing MST's ever done that I didn't really agree with. And I know that was more of a Sci-Fi Channel request because that happened right when they moved from Comedy Central to Sci-Fi. And,
especially in the movie when they had that inside joke, please give us the Sci-Fi Channel, which was a double joke. It's like they're making fun of radar, reception joke. And then it's like, but at that time they didn't know if this was literally their final outing in movie form. But they got picked up a following like few years later, and it's like, it is kind of funny how and they Kevin, I think you saw that one interview years ago. It was like a Get Coffee magazine, 2002, 2004. He was like, they fucking tortured us. He's like, we were so used to having one guy from back when HBO owned Comedy Central is like come to us once a year and then leave us alone. And Sci-Fi was kind of okay with that, like the first year, and then like the rest of the time is like they would send someone like once a year or once a month, I think. And it was like you say, is like it never made any sense because it's like they were always gonna air them out of order anyway. Even the one with Ernest Borgnine, the Merlin's Shop, that was aired after the show had already ended. It was supposed to be aired before, but it's like they had like a rights issue or something, and then they had a rights issue again.
Exactly right. Diabolic was supposed to be the last episode, but they ended up airing one more after that. I remember that shit.
what's funny is that was probably the first one I saw before I actually saw an official episode. So it's like, I was like, what is that creepy looking, monkey?
Oh,
And-
right, yeah, the monkey shines monkey dude.
right? And it was the first one I saw all the way through was Time of the Apes. So, oh my God,
Nice.
heavenly goodness. But yeah, it's like it's so wild how like that was from like a 70s TV movie the same guy made. And I've asked other people who have seen the episode uncut, what is the difference? Because like usually they would just take stuff out which not only wasn't riffable or just wasn't safe to air, but it was just so funny how it was like with Merlin is like they didn't. It's already a pretty violent, movie. It's the PG-13 rating, but it's wild how it's like they didn't really have anything else except just more shots of just Merlin just walking around. Sometimes even in shots where he's not even supposed to be there. And,
Just walking around the city looking for a toy monkey.
and it is kind of funny how it's like that caused confusion, and they had to clarify that on the message boards back when they had like a format. They were kind of. It's like Babylon 5 kind of opened that for fans, and they kind of just followed suit. It's like, okay, we'll do some, Yahoo group chats and everything. And it is kind of funny how it's like, yeah, there were certain times where people were like, I was confused when you made that Merlin quip. It's like, oh, because in the original cut of the movie, he was in that cut part. But what made it to the final frame, we kind of just had to ease up on him. Is like, okay, they actually technically can't see him in this part of the frame. But I know Paul Chaplin, who played a lot of various supporting characters and did some puppetry for Gypsy, I think, later on, and was later her voice was. I think he was involved a little bit again with when it returned to Netflix, but it was kind of funny how he's unfortunately, I think, had some issues with family, just having to nurse them back to health. So that's been sad, but it's been interesting seeing him and Bees McKeever, who I think was one of the art directors, just do some interaction, and they're just kind of natural comedians in and of themselves. So it's like, yeah, of course, that's why they ended up being guest stars on the show later on. But he even noticed is like, we had no idea that Space Mutiny got all its stock footage from the original Battlestar Galactica. Didn't even cross our minds. That's how big sci-fi fans we are. But yeah, going back to your original topic on the recurring characters, I mean, it is kind of funny. Is like these are kind of probably the most famous Lord of the Rings fans I know. I clearly read those books growing up in the 70s. So it's like to make Targo, the legendary, weird, groundskeeper, and Monos just be a recurring character, and then transform him like Gandalf. He's like, I'm Torgo the Grey, now I'm Torgo the White, and sucking banana heaven. I'm like, that's where Frank went all these years. I'm like, jeez, okay, works for me.
Yeah.
And if you go to the TV Tropes website page for RiffTrax, it's like Lord of the Rings riffs are like the only ones where they actually go easy on the movie because they are actually kind of hardcore LOTR fans. I'm like, jeez. And so they pretty much end up. Yeah. Oh man. Oh yeah. And the Phantom Planet, when I noticed it recently, was kind of interesting because of all the Trapped on Another Planet kind of ones done in black and white. That one's like goes by pretty fast, but they make a bunch of funny quips about the villain kind of being romanticized by the female heroine in that one. At one point, it's either, I think Kevin makes a funny Private Eye kind of joke, like it's making fun of the sultry nature of this movie at times, and then at another time, I think Mike whispers in a female voice, I should call the police. And I'm like, Jesus, some of these riffs are way, way ahead of the Me Too movement. Oh, man. Oh, so tell me about the Touch of Satan.
Oh man, this is where the fishes live. Do I have to say any more? I mean, I don't even have to hear that line. I can just think it and I just lose it. Just the ridiculousness of that girl. And I understand she's a sheltered woman, only lives on the farm, but obviously once you realize who she is, it's like, okay, you're 300 years old and that's the line you went with. This is where the fishes live.
Right. Redford look-alike, and then a Ryan O'Neal or somebody they were trying to ape, and then it seems to go is like the actors just kind of, I don't know if it's that they don't connect, it's that they just seem to just be very melodramatic and soapy. So it is kind of funny just seeing how the movie just kind of just keeps taking a turn, and just it much like Squirm, it's just another just kind of redneck kind of town.
Yeah. Those two had very little chemistry.
Right, and then it tries to get all sexual in like the last 5 minutes, and then it's like, oh, and it's just so funny seeing them just thinking what we're thinking. Oh yeah, it's like they're just making fun of all the transformations, and it's like, I mean, when you open up your movie with a random unrelated farmer getting killed by a pitchfork, that's like,
Grandma.
right? This was almost like Children of the Corn before there was one. It's like, yeah.
Kinda, yeah, actually.
Oh goodness. So I had a lot of favorites. I know a lot of people just couldn't get into it right away because like the first 2 episodes were pretty slow, but it was still interesting seeing them kind of take on the one that was like the South Korean knockoff of Godzilla.
Wait, South Korea. That's Young Gary.
Young Gary, yes. And I think it's one of those, it starts out pretty slow, but they really do find their groove by the end of the episode. They, much like with, was it Gargo, and then Gorgo does have some fun ones, but yeah, then there was like some, much like every other, just outing is like, I mean, there's even times where I think they snuck in a few Tor Johnson references. It's like they just got a lot of those kind of dark, creeping ones. What did you think of? They also had an encounter with the Asylum by having them do the Robot Jocks Pacific Rim knockoff Atlantic Rim. And
oh boy, Atlantic Rim. That's a painful one. Holy man.
Mm-hmm. And I'd seen Star Crash a few different times before uncut, but it was very hard to get through this time around. I was just like, man, there's no plot.
Yeah, I mean, well, with Star Crash, I mean, the mere fact that Joe Spinell's in there acting absolutely ludicrous is endlessly entertaining to me. The fact that he yells every line, like he can't speak a line in that movie. Everything is, it's this grand. Oh my God, I love it.
Right.
I couldn't tell you anything about that story, and I've seen that episode at least a dozen times. Joe Spinell, the fact that he can go from, scalping women in 1980 to being a fake Darth Vader less than 10 years later is just endlessly entertaining to me.
Not to mention coming from the Scorsese Coppola factory, and here he is in just a very confused,
They probably, I'm pretty sure they paid David Hasselhoff and Coke for that movie.
Oh, probably.
I guarantee. That's funny too that Hasselhoff, that he wasn't the star technically. He was like a big player, and the guy that actually was the star was like incredibly homely looking. I'm like, you've got Hasselhoff, why don't you make him the star? Hasselhoff in the early '80s too. This is like prime Hoff,
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, taking a break from, well, I think it was like 78, 79, but yeah, it was like a few years before his star. Yeah, he's doing soap operas at the time. So yeah, there you go. And I mean, Cry Wilderness is kind of another example of when they do a movie that just seems, back when they didn't give a shit about ratings, and you're like, whoa, I thought this was a kids movie.
Yeah, I like a lot of the stuff from the last 2 episodes. I think, or last 2 seasons, excuse me. Mm-hmm. I tend to gravitate towards Reptilicus. I think the song that Jonah raps in that episode, "Every Country Has a Monster," is literally one of the best songs in the series. And that was the first episode of their return. And I could not. I mean, what a perfect way to start Jonah's run as the host, because I adore that episode. Easily my favorite episode of the last 2 seasons. But I mean, if I had to make a top 25 or 20 all time, it might be on there. obviously it's a kaiju movie. We all know I'm a big kaiju guy.
Oh, yeah.
I tend to gravitate towards the kaiju episodes more and more. But yeah, Reptilicus, they absolutely nailed that, and that song is just pure magic to me.
I think it is on the
mind
album
you,
they released.
Oh, perfect. And mind you, I'm someone who hates when non-rappers rap. Like, I lived through the 90s and the 2000s when everybody was rapping, every car salesman, grannies, fast food mascots. But this, for whatever it's worth, it hits, and it hits hard. I love it.
He really did have a good tone with just all the various songs and just bursting into them naturally. And even having seen Baron Vong do stand up and Hampton Yao, the new Crow, hearing his rather X-rated comedy ventures of stand up CDs is like they just are all just natural goofballs. They've been all sheltered all throughout their lives and just are really good at just.
I think you have to be a goofball to be on this show. It's got to be so draining mentally and physically. You have to have a childlike enthusiasm to do this for 30 plus years now.
Oh, totally. And I can only imagine what season 13 will be like. I'm
excited. I need my money.
Yeah, I can't wait for my goodies to come in the mail after fundraising. Tell me about Killer Fish, because this is kind of a decent watchable movie, but it's also kind of funny because it's a very convoluted heist / Jaws knockoff, but it doesn't really make use of either formula. I don't know why
Italy did that so much. Italy actually had a time when they were mixing like shark ripoffs with heist movies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of more examples of that. I actually
did The Last Shark with Treatment.
Yes, The Last Shark. That's what I was thinking of. Exactly. It's like, why are you mixing these genres? Give me one or the other. There's no need to, jack of all trades, but master of none.
And almost all of our Giallo guys end up appearing on these MST3K and RiffTrax guys. One of my favorites, who was basically mentored by Argento, and I think probably his best one was The Sect, which is known to some as Demons 4, and is he did Ghost House for him, and I'm like, oh my, what a hell of a movie to get through. It's even by goofy Giallo standards, is or / haunted house movies that mashups they did, is this one was a really rough chore to get through. Just not much happening, but it's almost all of them end up appearing on some of these movies at some point, like Enzo G, Castorali, did the Bronx Warriors too, but I think just Franco is kind of interesting. It's you have to suffer for Fu Manchu. That's definitely an episode I can't do again. I'm I could give less of a shit about the political correctness. I'm more just in that is other than Christopher Lee, this movie just is doing everything that I find hard to watch a movie with when it's just the footage is just not matching up at all.
Right. No, that's valid. The Fu Manchu movies were always hard to watch, and now they're just problematic. So.
Oh, totally. And
sadly.
And yeah, I mean, it is so funny though how you look at some of their filmographies, and some of them have just a direct-to-video festival movie career, and others is a lot of these Italian guys, if they weren't doing gruesome Giallo slashers, they were doing Mad Max knockoffs or hardcore porn. I'm Jesus Christ, that's one hell of a resume. But yeah, it's they kind of got used to just even kind of just blending their genres together. I think that's why Lucio Fulci is just so brilliant with his 7 Doors of Death trilogy, because it's they pretty much were just whatever they wanted. It's getting mixed together one way or the other.
Yep. Bruno Mattei was always very guilty of that as well.
Oh yeah, and and because he did so many hackneyed movies, do you even really believe what he says when he's I had nothing to do with that movie? I'm well, can you even tell any of these movies apart? You claimed you didn't work on this other cash in on Romero's Zombies, but I mean, I can't tell it apart from your other zombie movie that you did do. So it's
well, he had so many fake names. I mean, he directed under 4 or 5 different pseudonyms.
Right.
Obviously, after his death, or even before his death, actually, it came out which movies were actually his. But yeah, he had like 4 pseudonyms, besides his actual name that he used.
Right. There's even like 2 different books that claim he worked on this movie that he claimed he didn't work on. And I'm like, well, 200 people say you did, so he just did too much pot after
Possibly. I mean,
banging the starlet and telling the cameraman what you want in the shot for tomorrow. I don't know. Oh, Jesus. But yeah, it is kind of fun how all these shows end up making you check out some of these movies and see which ones you legit actually love and which ones are just like, this is amusing trash, or, well, can't do that one again.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Too much for the Blu-ray.
I still say This Island Earth is one of the best movies they've ever riffed. I mean, in and of itself, that movie is great. Obviously, in 2021, it maybe doesn't hold up as well, but that movie was a blockbuster when it came out. It was an actual summer blockbuster, and
I think even in the trailer themselves, like they were even like it even lampooned all the blockbusters that were coming out at that time. They're like, this summer blockbusters get a different name or something like that. It was like, we're talking about 50s movies that pretty much before Star Wars, like made the whole phenomenon that what it was is like it didn't matter the dialogue wasn't perfect. It's like you're gonna have a mystery adventure and then a flying saucer, travel. And it's like, and yeah, it's totally H.G. Wells, Isaac Asimov inspired.
Yeah, like, I'll take that with a grain of salt.
Right. Obviously, it can't be Forbidden Planet, but it's basically, it was like around I think it was the same year as Day the Earth Stood Still. So yeah, it's like this is when sci-fi was getting way more experimental, and so it's like, and I know Joe Dante, who's a huge fan of that movie, and he's like, I did not like what they did with that. And it's like, in all fairness, Universal stripped down the movie. They didn't have anything to do with stripping it down. So.
Yeah, no, that's valid. I mean, obviously, I can see how some people would have an emotional connection with some of these movies, and then they watch, the Mystery Science Theater guys kind of, tear it apart, and they're going to take it personally. It's kind of funny how it's always fans that I hear about. It's rarely the filmmaker. I know you brought up a couple of examples earlier, which were totally new to me, but yeah, it's so rare. Or should I say, like I said, my original point about being attached to it, I could probably see somebody, like, say someone who grew up in the 50s and 60s and loved Reptilicus, and then they watch it in 2020 with Jonah Ray ripping it apart, and, maybe they take it a little personal because it's a piece of their childhood, a piece of nostalgia that someone who isn't a part of that time period is now ripping apart. So I can see that. I mean, it's always upsetting when I hear people get upset because of a riff, because ultimately a riff is exactly that, folks. It's parody, it's comedy. Not one word that Mike or any of the guys have ever said has been, serious, 100% serious. This is comedy, it's levity. You're supposed to enjoy yourself. So it does suck that some people get upset about it, but how can you get upset with This Island Earth? God,
even
those
some
riffs
people
are so timeless.
And there's even some people who get annoyed. Like, you can tell they were watching the show, but didn't realize they were watching a show. They thought they were watching a movie show. They're like, I sure wish those robots in the corner would shut up. I'm like,
yeah,
Jesus.
I've heard that complaint a lot. Like, when I first started watching it in the mid-90s, and you would mention it, people would be like, oh yeah, I turned into that once, and I didn't realize what was going on. I just wanted to watch the movie, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, too bad.
Jeez. What did you think about the Time Travelers, especially with that one of those earlier riffs they make, where they're like, why would you expect a good movie from Charles Band?
Oh yeah, that very valid point. It's been a while.
It is so funny though, because I would almost expect him to even. He's licensed a bunch of his movies to RiffTrax and even Elvira in the past, and he doesn't care. He's like, hey. It's a goofy movie, you bought it, but it would be so funny if he decided, I'm just going to remake every other movie that's aired on MST. But yeah, that's a very goofy movie where it's like, you can watch it, but you're like, not exactly sure what's going on. Everyone here is definitely pretty goofy. Robert
Hey,
Mitchum's
some of the
son,
best
Christopher.
movies ever don't make sense. So that's valid.
Mm-hmm. Can't say you got every Orson Welles movie in one watch. So yeah. The Beast of Hollow Mountain was kind of an interesting predicament because basically that had so many just kind of genres thrown into one
Mm-hmm.
basket.
That movie was a mess, absolute mess. Effects, acting, dialogue, just in
Right.
general a mess.
It's a Western, and then it becomes a, prehistoric movie, and
Yeah, tonally, it's all over the place.
then
I can't believe I'm talking about the tone of an MST film, but yeah, there you go.
Right. And Guy Madison, I would have thought he kind of had a bigger deal, but yeah, he's just a cowboy actor who's been around forever, and eventually, when he's not on Devil's Island or fighting the Incas, he's fighting dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs, man.
Oh, so good.
And that movie's kind of interesting too, because like they get to even play into the whole just sexual tension in the room that's inevitable in these kinds of movies, as well as the scenery and Mexican stereotypes. Oh man.
Oh man, so many stereotypes in some of these movies. I mean, you have to take these movies with a grain of salt and know that, they're products of their times.
Right.
You can't watch Castle of Fu Manchu and get mad at Christopher Lee. I mean, he probably had a smile on his face the whole production, having a blast. Hey, I'm a Chinaman, look. I mean, I understand, cultural sensitivity and blah blah blah, but yeah, these are time capsules, guys. Take it for what it was when it was.
Mm-hmm.
I understand canceling stuff. I mean, it sucks that I can't watch Song of the South anymore, but I understand why I can't watch Song of the South anymore. So
Right.
I'm not going to bitch too much about it, but it's still a shame.
Well, and like you say, it gets very old when you have movies that you already knew were kind of politically incorrect. So it's just like, but it's even harder when you see people online talking. You can't. It's like, okay, who's the neo-Nazi who doesn't want to get canceled, and who's the one who, legit just has always found this movie bottom of the barrel. It just wants it removed from society. And then there are other ones where it's like, okay, I think everyone just needs to take a chill pill. And it's like, yeah, this movie is bad, but there's so many other reasons why it's bad before we even get to the whole, routine of, man, the guy's treating every woman like a cheap slut, or like you say, or this is technically a homophobic movie, or if, it's like this movie kind of has a whole jingoistic nature to it when you take away the whole, shootouts.
Yeah.
And so it's like you just can't win. And almost all the old school guys who are in movies nowadays are going to have a movie that's basically, it's funny how they don't get complained about, but any other movie is like, yeah, they're doing something wrong. And it's like, well, in all fairness, they do even worse miscastings than us nowadays. Does anyone even remember that awful Peter Pan movie that came out in like 2015?
I'm trying not to.
But that was a perfect example of just total miscasting. And it's like, I think this show makes us realize just how many of today's blockbusters are even more unbearable, because, I mean, that's why when they did Batman versus Superman, is like, Mike respected Trace and Frank's wishes. He's like, okay, I get that you don't want to suffer for all 3 hours of this, so we're going to just have you riff individual scenes because we're getting tired of this movie too. So it is kind of funny how is like Trace and Frank would always say that, is like, we'll riff older movies because don't have to worry about rights, and
Sure.
the people who are in them are dead, so they can't get offended, and they're not 3 hours like every other movie nowadays. So it's like, yeah, it's like, I think that's the biggest issue with today's movies, is they kind of really are painful because you know what they're capable of. And so whenever you hear about any behind the scenes drama, which has often just stuff that you've heard about for years, but it was always broken to after the fact, years later. It was pretty hush hush on a film set. And here is like, the minute we hear about any actor being fired from a TV show for, a drunken insult, or a producer overriding a director and dismissing them, is like a project is dead in the water by that point. And it just sucks because it's hysterical as it kind of used to be. It is like now is like, man, but for 30 million, what did they spend it on? And so I think that's just it. We're so conscious of what our peers think, of what Rotten Tomatoes thinks, of what we've heard about other people say, to where it's like it really does even take probably 5 years when like a movie resurfaces on like Netflix or TNT nowadays for us to say, what was the big deal about this movie? Or, oh, now I see why I never saw it. It's just like, now I think we just don't have as much fun. So that's kind of why these Blu-ray companies have just snapped into action and just like remastered just stuff that would have been on a Videotronic guide back in the day. And I think that's just kind of the main life force of Blu-ray for now. Everyone just wants to go back to older stuff instead of just embrace newer stuff that's just not 100%. And
Sure.
Going back to Avalanche, that was interesting too, because that was just reminding me of just almost all the disaster movies that are still a spectacle today. Always have been since the 70s, and it's like that one was just coming in late to the bunch, and Roger Corman just kind of wanted to get on the still some of Irwin Allen's box office draw. And it's like, but the plot is like, boy howdy, I mean, Corey Allen, pretty established actor from what's the movie, Rebel Without a Cause. He's the kid in the car, and to become then an established TV director and writer, and on Star Trek of all shows. And it's like, man, this is not his finest hour as a director / writer. And I will say they do miss out. All seasons do miss out on making fun of certain actors that are in this. Was like, yeah, they didn't. I would have thought they'd sneak in a Robert Forster reference, but I guess they just figured, hey, this is a typical person we're used to seeing in these kinds of movies. So. Oh man, what did you think about The Love of Hercules? Because it's like, this is kind of a film history lesson. It's like, this is practically the movie where Mickey Hargitay and James Mansfield, met.
Oh, right.
And it's just so funny. You got just the fakest looking dragon, just an animatronic. It was fake back then, and it's fake now. But it is really funny how Mickey is essentially early Van Damme in this, and Jane, just kind of makes you remind you of how she was basically based her career on Marilyn Monroe,
Mm-hmm.
And so
who played Hercules in that one? I know we had multiple.
Mickey Hargitay.
Harkitay. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, they became husband and wife later, but yeah,
Right.
it was like, I did love how they went through, so many of the Steve Reeves ones. It's like, that was a great introduction for those kinds of movies.
Yeah, easily my favorite Hercules.
Totally. And I used to have a DVD set that had various of those Italian Hercules movies, and at one point one of them is essentially a Robin Hood movie, but it was called Hercules, and it was a very confusing romp. And I was like, man, why wasn't this on the show?
Yeah, that's just like Godzilla movies in Germany. For some reason in Germany they call Godzilla Frankenstein.
Yeah,
You actually find Godzilla movies, but with a Frankenstein versus the sea monster or something. I don't know why Germany. They're the only country that did it, but yeah, I guess they didn't have a word for Godzilla.
Godzilla. Yeah, it really does get confusing after a while, and it kind of makes it easier to even socialize with certain people who, have always known these movies under different names. So it's like, yeah, here we got the cut up version, so we don't know what the hell went on in what movie.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know for years. I didn't realize Ebra Horror of the Deep was actually a Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I saw it as Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, and then I'm looking at HBO Max one day, and it's there under Ebra, and I'm like, that looks like the Sea Monster because it looks like a giant lobster. And it's like, yeah, I can see why different titles in different regions could definitely, mess you up.
Totally. And are you looking forward to their upcoming Amityville riff?
Kind of. I have cautious optimism. I've never seen the film. I'm purposely not going to watch it. But yeah, I definitely because I do enjoy when the RiffTrax guys kind of tackle more modern horror, The Last Slumber Party, The Dentist, stuff like that. So,
Right.
I mean, even though this isn't the RiffTrax guys, I understand that, you know, and Joel, everything leads back to Joel Hodgson. So obviously I will give him credit as the godfather of all of this. And yeah, if Joel's involved and they're doing, you know, the movies that they're doing, I mean, because they're talking about doing a Christmas special as well. So yeah, I'm very excited. And yeah, I wouldn't have given him my money if I wasn't excited. And I want my free poster, damn it.
Right? Oh, man. Well, thank you ever so much for being on here. And any other plugs for your podcast, please?
Oh, man, how much time you got? Way too many shows in my vernacular. Let's just say that under the No More Room in Hell banner, we have 3 podcasts. The main show, No More Room in Hell. We have Fresh Cuts, which is the weekly show where we look at the newest genre releases of that week. And then the newest venture is called Creature Comforts, where we're going to be concentrating on classic creature features. So
Nice.
that'll be coming soon. If you subscribe to No More Room in Hell, you'll get all 3 shows. So look out for those. Once again, that's all Dark Discussions Podcast Network. And as far as Legion Podcast, Underwater Kaiju from Outer Space. We've done about 25 episodes of that with Jerry Herring, Donna Nelly, and Mr. Derek B. from Cinema Attack. And like I said, we're going to be doing our return episode probably the beginning of October, and should be out shortly after that, where we're going to look at Godzilla versus Destoroyah, which is actually my favorite Godzilla movie ever. So that'll be fun.
There you go. Very cool. Gojira time. Thank you ever so much for being on here, and you know it. You're welcome back anytime. Just a non-stop recording session every day off.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was, like I said, this was the first opportunity I had to talk about MST on a podcast, and this was an absolute joy. So yeah, I look forward to chatting with you again, buddy.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try
They must be destroyed on sight.
the new Podcast Cure-All? Sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of
They must be destroyed on sight.
as needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pox disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Hey, I heard you like movies.
I heard you like to hustle.
I heard you like podcasts.
Well, guess what?
There's a podcast for you out there called The Home Video Hustle.
Damn right.
Every Friday we talk about whatever movie PJ picks out the bag. What does that mean? Every Wednesday on our YouTube page, I put a bunch of movies in a bag, and PJ picks one out at random. And then we just watch it. We talk about it for maybe like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever we feel like doing, wherever the conversation leads us.
But do we actually talk about the movie?
Most of the time. Tangents galore.
Yes.
So believe me, we may be a movie podcast, but it's not always about movies. We may talk about video games,
Music.
Yeah, that's the big one, music. Sometimes we might get a little bit of politicalness in there.
Yes.
Sometimes we may just, we know what we like to do. We like to tell stories, PJ.
Yes.
I am the master storyteller of the podcast realm. Undefeated. So if you like to hear about movies, video games, whatever foolishness comes to our mind, the most random stuff you could think of, check out the Home Video Hustle. You can find us on the Stitchers, the Google Play, Apple Podcasts,
What else?
Podbean,
What else?
Podcast Addict,
Goddamn.
all that. Ain't no reason you can't get your hustle on. We everywhere, worldwide, baby.
Hustle, motherfucking hustle.
Hey, we can't cuss in the promo, PJ.
Ah.
We gotta be family friendly. There may be podcasts out there that don't want his hair say
Ah.
all that good fun stuff.
Well, you.
Don't run the listeners away, PJ.
I'm sorry.
But this is going kind of long.
Yes.
So we're going to end this and say, hey, check out the Home Video Hustle every Friday on all the various podcast outlets. Peace.
Peace.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. And while Witch didn't make it to the top of the world, he did make the Gangs of Hollywood podcast. So join the gang and enjoy a movie review podcast about movie gangs, gangsters, mobsters, and the mayhem they cause. You can find GOH Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at GOH Pod at www.gohpod.com, as well as your favorite podcast listening app. And remember, say hello to your little friend for me.
If you take two old punk rockers who are past their prime, put them in front of a movie screen, and give them a podcast, what do you get? Cinema Punks. Cinepunks. It's the mixtape of movies.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of her.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history
up.
all popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was
How
going to be a
could you
rough
watch
one.
this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
Lady, it's time, let's check our cue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. Whether one likes plot holes or gratuitous movies, it's time to get busy with your friend Steve and Izzy at eilfm.podbean.com.
Welcome to Who Was She podcast. I am your host, Tara Jabari. After a decade working in documentaries, marketing, and all things digital media, I found that podcasting is a strong medium to share stories. After years of producing for others, I decided to start my own biographical podcast. Who Was She will focus on the life of a woman throughout Baha'i history. The first season is about Lydia Zamenhof. Lydia's story explores the subjects of the power of language and faith. Her father invented the universal language Esperanto, and she came from a Jewish family and became a Baha'i. She grew up during World War I and was killed during World War II in a concentration camp, despite heroic efforts to save her life. How can one person's life intersect with so many others, connect across borders, and inspire a biography which inspired this podcast? Over the next few weeks, I will share her story with you and the lives that were most affected by her and those who affected her life as well. They include her father, Ludwig Zamenhof, her spiritual mother, American journalist Martha Root, and the Baha'i German soldier Fritz Mako, who worked for the resistance undercover while having to serve the Nazi Party. I want to thank the author Wendy Heller and George Ronald Publishing for their blessing to let me use Heller's biography, Lydia, The Life of Lydia Zamenhof, Daughter of Esperanto, as a main and instrumental resource for this podcast. So please subscribe and learn about this amazing woman who traveled through 3 continents in an effort to bring unity through the power of language. You can also find more information on our Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at Who Was She Podcast. Music was composed and performed by Sam Red. I am your host, Tara Jabari. Join us next time as we begin our journey about Lydia Zamenhof.
Hi, everybody. It's Mac Jackson. I wanted to invite you to a new site called the Forever Adventure Network. This website has everything: pictures, videos, blogs. There's original music by Harmony Constant, 2 podcasts. One is the MacGyver podcast, where we celebrate Richard Dean Anderson, his iconic roles, and how it's influenced our lives. There's episode discussions, interviews, and life conversations. The second podcast is the Never Gets Old podcast, where we celebrate all the best things that we love in life, from TV, movies, music, and comics. The site is also the home for the MacGyver SG-1 audio series, an ongoing adventure series that continues the adventures of MacGyver and SG-1. There are also multiple stores to choose from for all of your pop culture and adventure needs. Come on by and check us out today. And thanks for joining the adventure.
Are you sick of the same old stale podcasts? Well, then join Vanessa and Darren as they dissect movies of all kinds. The 2 lifelong cinema lovers bring their favorites, curiosities, and first-time watches to the operating table and inject them with a healthy dose of snark. Then there's the waiting room, where they examine books and short stories. So just look for them on Apple Podcasts and where fine podcasts are available. They're part of the Legion Podcast Network. Follow them on Twitter at VDClinicPod. Join them on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/VDClinicPod. Or email them at vdclinicpod@gmail.com. They're ready to cure what ails you. And still, they just might be a little contagious.
Hi there. It's Heather from the Watching Netflix Without You podcast. Did you know that there are over 1,200 Netflix original feature films and documentaries? And that number is only growing. So I've made it my mission to watch as many as I possibly can. Then, with a delightful guest or guests, Disclaimer, more often than not my brother Ryan. We spend an episode rating, reviewing, and discussing a film at length. The first half of every episode is spoiler-free for those who haven't seen it yet. And in the second half, after a very clear spoiler warning, we dive into it. And that's really about it. You can listen to Watching Netflix Without You on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more.
We now continue with our program.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up